Every man wanted her, every man chased her, and one by one, every man left in silence, hiding a shame they could never explain.
Hey besties! Tonight on African Tales by Chinua, a widow is accused, a village hides its shame, and a king's wisdom stands between justice and injustice. In Ile Odo, love made a promise, and fear made a curse. Stay with me, guys, cause tonight's story will make you question desire, truth, and the price of silence. Dive in with me.
In the quiet village of Il Odo, surrounded by tall palm trees and red dusty paths, lived a young couple named Aayobani and Tanimola. Their house was small, built with mud walls and a thatched roof, but anyone who stepped inside could feel warmth and peace. They were not wealthy people. They did not own large lands or shining clothes. Yet, their hearts were rich with love, and that love was what kept their home alive. Every morning before the sun rose fully, Aayobani would step out with his farming tools resting on his shoulder. Tanimola would follow him to the door, adjusting the scarf on her head while carrying a small bowl of food for the children. Their life was simple and repetitive, but it was never bitter. They worked on a small piece of farmland at the edge of the village, planting cassava, maize, and vegetables. Some days the harvest was good, other days it was poor. Still, they never allowed hardship to steal their joy. They had 2 children, Tayo, the older one, who was curious and always asking questions, and little Wumi, whose laughter could brighten even the darkest evening. Training the children was not easy. School fees were a burden, and there were days when food was just enough. But Aayobani and Tanimola believed that education would give their children a better future than the one they had. So they struggled quietly, selling farm produce in the local market and saving every small coin they could. What made their family special was not money, but harmony. There were no loud quarrels in their house, no bitter words thrown in anger. When challenges came, they talked through them. When one was tired, the other offered comfort. Neighbors often paused outside their compound just to listen to their evening laughter. Many people in Ile Odo secretly admired them. Some even envied them. In a village where wealth often caused pride and conflict, Aayobani and Tanimola lived with contentment. To outsiders, their life looked ordinary, but to those who truly observed, it was clear. Their small home carried a rare treasure that many rich houses lacked: genuine peace. Tanimola was known in Ile Odo for her striking beauty. Her skin glowed like fresh palm oil under the sun, her eyes were calm and bright, and her smile carried a quiet charm that drew attention wherever she went. Even when she dressed simply with a plain wrapper and blouse, she still stood out among other women in the market. People often said she looked like someone born into royalty but living in a farmer's hut. At first, the admiration seemed harmless. Women complimented her looks, and elders praised her good manners. But soon, the attention from men in the village began to grow uncomfortable. Some would deliberately pass by her stall in the market just to greet her. Others brought small gifts, fruits, beads, or pieces of cloth, pretending it was simple kindness. A few were bold enough to whisper promises of wealth and comfort if she agreed to leave her husband. Tanimola never entertained such thoughts. Her love for Aayobani was deep and sincere. Each time a man crossed the line, she returned home and told her husband everything. They would laugh together, sometimes even joking about how the village men wasted their time. To Tanimola, it was nothing more than foolish behavior that did not deserve serious attention. But inside Aayobani's heart, something slowly began to change. The laughter he shared with his wife did not fully hide the growing unease in his mind. He trusted Tanimola completely, yet the constant attention she received planted small seeds of fear. He began to notice how men stared at her when she walked by, how their greetings lingered too long. Though he never spoke harshly or accused her of anything, a silent worry started to live within him, a worry he did not yet understand, but one that would soon grow stronger than he expected. As months passed, Aayobani's quiet worry slowly turned into deep fear. He tried to ignore it at first. Whenever Tanimola told him about another man offering gifts or making promises, he forced a smile and acted unbothered. But at night, when the village grew silent, his thoughts refused to rest. He would lie beside his wife, listening to her gentle breathing, and questions filled his mind. What if one day someone richer comes? What if they tempt her with things I cannot provide? He knew Tanimola loved him, and she had never given him a reason to doubt her. Yet fear does not always listen to truth. It grows quietly, feeding on imagination. Aayobani began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way some men greeted Tanimola with too much excitement, the way their eyes followed her as she walked away, even harmless compliments started to sound like hidden intentions to him. His heart tightened each time he saw it, though he kept his feelings locked inside. Then a darker thought crept in, one that refused to leave. What will happen if I die, he wondered. Will they wait for my body to be buried before they chase her? Or will they come immediately, like hungry animals? The thought frightened him more than sickness or poverty ever had. He imagined strangers entering his home, touching what he called his own, and the picture tormented him. Sleep became difficult. Peace slowly slipped away from his heart. Though he still laughed with his children and worked on the farm, a storm was quietly forming inside him. Love had not left him, but it had begun to mix with fear. And fear, when left alone for too long, can push a man toward decisions he never planned to make. One evening, after the sun had disappeared behind the tall trees and darkness slowly covered Ile Odo, Aayobani made a decision he had been fighting in his heart for weeks. He told Tanimola he was going to check something on the farm, but his feet were not heading toward the farmland. Instead, he walked toward the thick forest at the edge of the village. Deep inside that forest stood the ancient shrine of Aayobani, the strongest deity in Ile Odo. The elders always warned that Aayobani was powerful and did not accept foolish prayers. People only went there when their hearts were heavy or when they desired something beyond human strength. As Aayobani walked, the night air felt colder than usual. Every sound of rustling leaves made his heart beat faster. Yet he did not turn back. When he reached the shrine, a small oil lamp gleamed beside a carved wooden statue covered with white chalk and dried leaves. The place was silent, but it carried a strange weight that made him kneel without being told. He closed his eyes and spoke from the depth of his fear. He begged the deity to protect his marriage beyond life itself. He asked that any man who came close to sleeping with his wife, whether he was alive or dead, should lose his manhood instantly. As his words ended, a sudden wind blew through the trees, though the night had been still. The lamp flame danced wildly but did not go out. Aayobani felt a strong shiver run through his body, as if invisible hands had touched his back. In that moment he understood without doubt. The covenant had been heard. It was sealed. Aayobani returned home that night with slow, thoughtful steps. The forest behind him was dark and quiet again, as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside him something had changed. The heavy fear that once pressed on his chest felt lighter. For the first time in many months, his heart was calm. He believed his marriage was now protected by a power stronger than any human desire. When he entered the house, Tanimola was already asleep beside the children. The small oil lamp in the corner gave a soft yellow glow. Aayobani stood there for a moment, watching them. He felt love, relief, and a strange sense of victory. Yet mixed with that relief was a secret he knew he could never share. He quietly lay down beside his wife, careful not to wake her, and closed his eyes. That night, sleep came quickly and deeply. Days turned into weeks, and life continued as normal. Aayobani went to the farm each morning. Tanimola sold produce at the market. The children played in the dusty compound after school. Nothing seemed different on the outside, but Aayobani now carried an invisible shield in his mind. Whenever a man greeted his wife too warmly, he no longer felt the sharp sting of jealousy. Instead, he felt a silent confidence, as if a hidden guard stood beside his home. Still, he never mentioned the covenant to anyone. Not to his friends, not to the village elders, and especially not to Tanimola. He feared she might not understand or might worry about the spiritual weight of his action, so he buried the truth deep within himself. But secrets are like seeds planted in dark soil. They may remain unseen for a long time, but one day they always grow, often in ways no one expects. Years passed, and the peaceful rhythm of Aayobani's home continued. Tayo and Wumi grew taller, their voices stronger, and their dreams wider. For a while, it seemed as if nothing could break the quiet happiness that lived in their small compound. But life, like the weather, can change without warning. One rainy season, Aayobani fell sick. At first, it was a simple fever. Tanimola prepared herbal drinks and placed wet cloths on his forehead. The village healer was called and prayers were said. Everyone believed he would recover quickly, just as he had done in the past. But this time was different. The fever refused to leave. His body grew weaker each day, and his once strong voice became faint. Soon Aayobani could no longer go to the farm. He lay on the mat inside their hut, watching life continue without him. Tanimola tried to stay strong, but fear returned to her eyes. The children sat quietly beside their father, confused by the sudden silence that had filled their home. Neighbors visited with sympathy, but sympathy could not cure sickness. Then, one early morning before the rooster crowed, Aayobani breathed his last. The news spread quickly through Ile Odo. Wails filled the compound. Tanimola cried until her voice broke, holding her husband's lifeless hand as if he might still wake up. Tayo wept openly, while little Wumi clung to her mother's wrapper, not fully understanding what death meant, but feeling its weight in the air. For Aayobani's family, it was the darkest day they had ever known. Their pillar was gone, their protector had fallen. But beyond the tears and mourning in hidden corners of the village, some men saw something else. Not tragedy, but opportunity. And while one home drowned in grief, silent intentions began to rise like shadows at sunset. After Aayobani was buried, silence settled heavily on Tanimola's home. The laughter that once filled the compound disappeared. Every corner of the house reminded her of her husband, his farming tools by the wall, his old sandals near the door, his voice echoing in her memories. She tried to stay strong for her children, but grief followed her like a shadow. Not long after the mourning period ended, the visits began. At first, they came with polite greetings and soft voices. Some men brought food, others brought money, pretending they only wanted to help a struggling widow. But their intentions soon became clear. Their words carried hidden meaning, their eyes lingered too long, and their kindness always came with conditions. Tanimola refused them all. She still loved her husband deeply and respected the bond they had shared. When persuasion failed, cruelty followed. Rumors began to spread. Some villagers whispered that she was proud. Others said she thought she was better than everyone. Soon her farmland was seized by distant relatives who claimed ownership. Neighbors who once greeted her warmly began to ignore her. Simple help, like borrowing tools, suddenly became impossible to receive. Hunger slowly entered her home. Feeding Tayo and Wumi became harder each day. School fees went unpaid. Nights grew longer as the children cried from empty stomachs. Tanimola sold her few belongings, but it was never enough. The same men who once offered gifts now watched her struggle, waiting like vultures circling a wounded animal. The pressure tightened around her life. She was no longer just a grieving widow, she was now a woman cornered by hardship. And in that dark moment when strength was fading and her children's survival stood before her, the choices she once rejected began to look different. Not because her heart had changed, but because desperation was knocking louder than pride. One evening, when the sky was turning orange and the air felt heavy with dust, Tanimola sat outside her hut, watching her children sleep. They had eaten only a small portion of boiled yam that day. Their thin faces and tired eyes broke her heart. She had tried everything, begging for work, borrowing food, selling her last wrapper. But nothing was enough anymore. Hunger had become a daily visitor in her home. That was the night she finally gave in. A wealthy trader in the village had been visiting her repeatedly, offering money in exchange for a night with her. She had refused him many times, but desperation now clouded her strength. With trembling hands and a heart filled with shame, she accepted his offer, telling herself it was only for the sake of her children. The man arrived later that night, confident and smiling. He placed few stacks of money on the mat and spoke sweet words, believing victory was already his. But when the moment came, something strange happened. His confidence vanished. Panic replaced his smile. No matter what he did, his body refused to respond. Fear gripped him. Without a word, he grabbed his clothes and rushed out of the house like a thief caught in daylight. Tanimola was left confused and shaken. Days later, another man tried. The same thing happened, then another and another. Each one left in silent terror, never daring to speak of it. The pattern became undeniable. Wordless shame tied their tongues, especially for the married men who feared exposing themselves. Slowly, whispers began to move through Ile Odo. Many men were secretly suffering the same fate. They did not know why. They did not know how. But deep in the unseen world, Aayobani's covenant had awakened, and the curse had begun its quiet work. As weeks turned into months, the strange problem among the men of Ile Odo spread like an invisible sickness. Many of them carried the same secret fear, but none dared to speak openly. Their pride would not allow it. Instead of admitting what was happening to them, they searched for someone to blame, and their eyes all turned to one person, Tanimola. Whispers began in the marketplace. Women heard their husbands complain in frustration, but never understood the full story. Soon, rumors grew louder. Some said Tanimola had visited dark shrines. Others claimed she was using witchcraft to destroy men. The truth was hidden behind shame, so lies found easy space to grow. One afternoon, a group of angry men gathered and decided she must be banished from the village. They marched to the palace, raising their voices and demanding justice. Tanimola was summoned before the king, her children standing close behind her, their small hands clinging to her wrapper in fear. She did not understand the full accusation, only that many powerful men wanted her gone. The king of Il Odo was an elderly man known for wisdom and patience. He listened quietly as the men spoke over one another, each trying to sound convincing without revealing the real issue. When they finished, the king raised his hand for silence. Then he asked a simple question. What exactly did this woman do? The courtyard fell quiet. No one answered. No one could explain clearly. They shifted their feet, avoided eye contact, and swallowed their words. Their pride trapped them in silence. In that moment, the king observed carefully and noticed something important. Only men were complaining, and most of them were married. Suspicion filled his wise eyes as he began to understand that the truth was hiding behind their fear. The king sat still for a long moment, his sharp eyes moving from one man to another. The courtyard was filled with uneasy silence. The men who had shouted the loudest before now looked down at the ground, unable to defend their accusations. Their anger had suddenly lost its strength. The king understood that something deeper was hidden behind their complaints. He turned to Tanimola, who stood quietly with tears in her eyes, her children pressed against her sides. Her clothes were worn, her face tired, but there was no wickedness in her appearance, only suffering. The king spoke firmly, his voice echoing across the palace walls. This woman is not a witch. She is a widow who has been treated unjustly. A wave of murmurs passed through the crowd. The king continued, ordering that every piece of farmland taken from Tanimola be returned immediately. He warned the villagers that anyone who harassed or threatened her again would face severe punishment. From that day, her welfare and that of her children became the responsibility of the palace itself. Slowly, life changed. Tayo and Wumi returned to school. Food returned to their table. The laughter that once disappeared began to find its way back into their small home. To the village, peace seemed restored, but beneath that peace lived a quiet fear. The men who had secretly tried to take advantage of Tanimola continued to suffer in silence. None dared confess what had happened to them. They carried their shame like a hidden chain, watching her from afar but never again stepping close. At night, some of them claimed to see Aayobani in their dreams, standing at the edge of a dark forest, his eyes calm but unmovable. In the unseen world, Aayobani's spirit rested. His love had protected his family, but his fear had left a curse that would never be spoken aloud in Ile Odo again. This story teaches us that lust and wickedness can blind people to their own wrongs. The men of Ile Odo allowed desire to control their actions. Instead of respecting a grieving widow, they chose to pressure, bully, and accuse her. Their shame turned into cruelty, and their cruelty almost destroyed an innocent woman and her children. It also reminds us that power without wisdom is dangerous, but wisdom with patience can save the vulnerable. If the king had listened only to noise and anger, Tanimola would have been punished for a crime she never committed. But he chose to think, observe, and ask the right question. Because of his wisdom, truth was revealed and justice was restored. Sometimes the loudest voices are not the honest ones, and sometimes the person standing alone is the one who needs protection the most. If you were in that village, would you have followed the crowd, or would you have stood up for Tanimola when everyone else turned against her?
So, besties, if the story made you think, reflect, or question human behavior, guys, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to African Tales by Chinua. Share the story with someone who believes in justice, wisdom, and standing up for the innocent. Because sometimes one wise voice is all it takes to stop a village from making a terrible mistake. Till our next story. Bye.